This video will describe the Relativization Strategies and Hierarchy tab in the Relative Clause dialog. But before we start working on this, I want to mention one thing. When working with relative clauses, you'll almost certainly want to come to the feature adjustment rules, add new features, and select either 4 or 5. We'll select 5, grammatical relations with voice. This is a rule that supplies grammatical relations. When we talk about the relativization hierarchy, we always talk in terms of grammatical relations, not semantic rules. So you'll probably want to activate either 4 or 5, and also number 6. This adds a feature to noun phrases called relativized with a value yes or no. So this sentence is saying the man that met Mary read this book. So there's a relative clause, it's modifying man. NP-rel is highlighted in blue. Remember, NP-rel is the noun phrase inside the relative clause that's co-referential with the head noun. So let's go back to our Strategies and Hierarchy tab. Okay, when we come here, there are 2 types of relative clauses, restrictive relative clauses and descriptive relative clauses. For each type, we have the relativization hierarchy, subject, object, indirect object, oblique, genitive. We don't allow relative clauses formed on genitives because many languages don't permit those. For an example, the man whose leg is broken. The man whose leg is broken is my friend, or something like that. We don't allow relative clauses formed on genitives or objects of comparison. Mary wrote more books than John read. We only allow relative clauses formed on these 4 grammatical relations. So when you come here, you'll need to specify subject. When you click on that button, you can select subject. Now you might wonder, why do we let you select the grammatical relation? There are 2 reasons. Number 1, we're not certain you'll use our set of grammatical relations. And number 2, you may have multiple subjects. You might have different types of subject-noun phrase. So you can come here and select any grammatical relations that are relevant in your language for subjects. And after we've done that, let's do non-reduction for this one. So here we are. This is NP-rel is the subject. And for non-reduction, we don't do anything in here. The features aren't changed, and we don't delete the target word. Let's go back there. If we select the gap strategy for subjects, then now when we come here, the target noun is deleted. That's all we do for the gap strategy, is delete the target noun. Let's go to our next example. This is saying the man that Mary met read that book. So now NP-rel is the object. So let's set this up for objects. We'll come here. For object, we need to specify our grammatical relation. And for object, let's say pronoun retention. Now, as soon as we click any of these in the pronoun retention column, this drop-down is enabled. This is the value inserted into noun's surface realization feature for pronoun retention. None of these values are appropriate right now. So we can click on the feature set button. We'll go to nouns, surface realization, and we'll call this pronoun retention. So we'll add that value. And now when we come here, it's available. So now when we select pronoun retention, the pronoun retention strategy for any of the grammatical relations, this value will be inserted into the noun's surface realization feature. So we click OK. And now when we look here, we see surface realization equals pronoun retention. Now your spell out rules for pronouns down here, later they will look at this value, pronoun retention. And there you will write a rule that sees this feature, and it might look at other features like the grammatical relation, and then it will supply the proper surface form for that pronoun. Let's go to the next example. Here, this is saying the man that Mary gave a letter to read this book. So now, NP-rel is the indirect object. So let's set up our strategy for indirect objects. We'll come back here, indirect object, specify the grammatical relation. Let's say this time we'll insert the relative pronoun. As soon as we select one of these radio buttons in this column, this drop down is enabled. But none of these values are appropriate, so again we click Feature Set, we go to Nouns, we go to Surface Realization, we'll say Relative Pronoun, and now when we come here we can select that value, and now when we rest our cursor here, Surface Realization is set to Relative Pronoun. And again, your spell out pronoun rules will see that feature value, and you can write a rule that will supply the proper surface form. Let's go to one more. This is saying the man that Mary walked with. So now this is an oblique noun phrase. Grammatical relation is oblique, relativized is yes. So let's set up our strategy for oblique noun phrases. We click on the button. We'll select all of these. And for obliques, let's say we enter a relativizer. We'll say that. So now we see the relativizer that. And it was inserted by Relativization Structures and Strategies, Restrictive Relative Clause Strategies, oblique. Let's look at the descriptive relative clauses. So this is saying John, who met Mary, read this book. So NP-rel is subject, but this time the clause type is descriptive thing modifier. When we say John, presumably the listener knows who John is, but we're just adding descriptive information about John. So this is a descriptive relative clause. And let's go here. We'll come down for descriptive relative clauses. Again, we need to specify subject. This time we'll do all of these while we're here. Object, indirect object, oblique, and I will say non-reduction again for subject, gap, pronoun retention for indirect object, and relative pronoun for oblique. And for the oblique, we'll also say, we'll include a relativizer that. So for subject, it's non-reduction. So we come here, this is the subject noun phrase, and there's no change. We don't delete the target word. We don't change any features here. Nothing is changed for non-reduction. If we go to the next example, this is saying John, whom Mary met, read that book. Now this is the gap strategy. And we don't change any features here, but the target noun is deleted. We come here. This is saying John, whom Mary gave a letter to, read this book. Now this one uses the pronoun retention. So we don't delete the target word, but the feature, the surface realization feature, is set to pronoun retention, and your spell out rule for pronouns will look at that feature value and provide the proper surface form. And one more. This is saying John, whom Mary walked with, read that book. We have the relativizer, and we also see that surface realization is set to relative pronoun.